We're almost ready to go here. Welcome to Ben. Welcome to Andrew. How you guys doing tonight?
Good.
I'm doing great. This is like last summer, Theo. I sprinted home from kickball, got all dressed up for the show, and then here I am, ready to go.
Yeah, so this is going to be a good one. I'm going to fire it up right now, guys.
Let's do it.
Go district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offers the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
So what's up, everyone? We're 2 months out from the NFL season officially starting. For those of you drafting in Vegas, you will be in somewhere either have just finished a draft or getting ready to do the Degenerates post-opening game draft. I may or may not be in one of those ones. So we have to bring the heavy hitters in. Tonight we're bringing in Ben Gretch. I don't need to give him much of an introduction. If you're about that life, like the young kids say in fantasy football game, you know who Ben is. You listen to him on Stealing Bananas with Sean Siegel. You listen to him on Ship Chasing. And we're also going to talk a little bit more about stealing signals tonight. I'm a Stealing Signals subscriber. Maybe Ben, you could talk a little bit about Stealing Signals and what it offers to the fantasy community.
I mean, it's mostly just a newsletter where I write about whatever I think is important. Like it's like a personal blog. No, during the season, Stealing Signals, I go team by team. I break down everything I saw on Sundays, on Mondays and Tuesdays. It's very long, thorough. Highlight what I think the signal and noise is, key stats. Looks at snap shares and route shares and all the usage stuff, but also always keeping an eye on the actual talent of the players and where things can trend, the things we know in large analyses that are done all through the off seasons, the things that we're looking for. We're looking for rookies roles growing. We're looking for young players that are potentially going to move forward where chips are going to fall positively typically for these guys. So that's the in-season thing, and that's definitely a grind. People seem to really like that. In the off-season, I mean, I've been writing a lot of theory posts. I've just been writing stuff that I think is really interesting. I'm going to be doing these off-season Stealing Signals posts here in the next couple of weeks where I go team by team after I've gone through my projections and highlight all the things that I think are really notable relative to for draft season, relative to where guys are going in drafts and all that. So a lot of content coming there for draft season over the next couple of months. But I mean, the concept for the newsletter was the in-season article, which I've written for about 5 years now, I think. And it's just, the in-depth team by team look at all that stuff.
It started as you screaming into the void, and there's like Theo and I.
Need more content. I think it's great because I think you basically make some more complicated things very simple to read and follow. You watch all the games, and I think you're able to spot. It's very helpful for like future waiver wire stuff, kind of for assessing where your team is. For a dynasty, I think you're good at projecting, future breakouts or guys that are on the cusp. And if you're into things like, looking into targets per route run, green zone touches. I mean, Ben is extremely detail oriented with it. And if you subscribe to it, you get access to your rankings as well, Ben. Or are you planning to release those?
Yeah, rankings will be out soon. I live in a state where I'm not able to do underdog and as much drafting as I want to do yet. So I haven't released any rankings yet, in part because I feel like I'm behind some of my subscribers in terms of, and I want to be able to test my rankings enough before I, make them public. I mean, there's a lot of rankings out there, but I'll have some out very soon. I've had a lot of people asking here in the next, couple of weeks, certainly in time for draft season, in time for August.
Awesome.
Gretch, are you going to Vegas this year? Were you there last year?
I am. I did not go last year, no. Because COVID
your schedule lined up or no?
I'm going to be there Wednesday to Saturday. I haven't got my flights yet. I was actually looking earlier today. But that's when the ship chasing guys, they already got their flights. That's the days I'll be there kind of, hanging with those guys.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, what are you doing, Theo? Wednesday, Saturday?
Yeah, no, I'm
out early Saturday. Normally I'm there like all day through Sunday, but I'm out early this year. I'm
staying Sunday this year, and I'm flying out on Monday morning. So I'm doing the gauntlet Wednesday through Sunday. Drafting way too many teams. I'm doing FFWC, FFPC, and NFFC. It's gonna be just awesome this year. I'm super stoked for it. And speaking of drafts, Andrew and I, we drafted last night. We had a Half Milli Billy show where we live drafted a Football Guys team. But all three of us are in slow main events right now. What round are you in, Ben?
About the 12th.
About the 12th. So you guys are a little ahead of me. Andrew, you're
17th.
Okay, so you're almost done, and I'm at the very end of the 7th. Maybe we could just talk about our structural builds through like the first 7 rounds. Which way did you guys go, Ben?
Well, I mean, surprise, but we wound up with a 0 RB team. It wasn't really intentional, but we came out the gate hot this year. It's a full 0 RB. We had the 105. I think there's a pretty clear top 5 this year, personally. Jamar Chase at 105, pretty easy selection. Really liked getting Kyle Pitts in the 2nd round. And then we got T. Higgins as the last of a wide receiver tier in the 3rd. And then by the time you're in the 4th, it's like, I mean, there's some backs we could have considered there, but I'm a big, running back dead zone guy. I think if you're at that point and you haven't taken a running back yet, that's when you can make a mistake and start trying to pile up running backs. That's where the hit rate tends to be really poor. I'm okay with taking the running backs in the first 3 rounds, contrary to sort of my sometimes, more public persona. I'm totally fine with hitting on some of the guys that we know are going to be workhorses. But if you go a different route in the first 3 rounds, it's like the mistake I see people make. And the reason I try to push people towards 0 RB is that they pull out too quick. And then they're like, oh, well, 0 RB didn't work for me. But it's like the real reason it didn't is you didn't press the advantage that you were starting to create for yourself at wide receiver. That's what we did in this draft. We took receiver in the 4th, receiver in the 5th. We got a high upside quarterback in Kyler, more receivers. We got pretty lucky with some running back values fall to us. So we just got Singletary in the 8th, 10 picks after ADP. We got Michael Carter in the 11th. We got Gainwell in the 12th, also after ADP. I think all 3 of them were pretty significantly after ADP, about 8 picks minimum after ADP, which was pretty nice. So now top 3 running backs, that's not a great crew, but I'm not that upset when you have 7 elite receivers. You have Kyle Pitts, you have Kyler Murray.
I love the Singletary pick in the 8th. I think that's great value. Andrew, which way did you go with your first few rounds?
Let me do this. I'm gonna forget, so I actually pulled it up and I'll share it on the screen if that's more professional.
Sure, I can go first if you want to.
Yeah, no, I mean I'm ready. I'm ready if you're ready.
Okay, you go ahead. Go ahead, Andrew.
Here you go. Add it to the screen.
Sure.
So, Gretch, and Theo knows this because I've just been sending the board like every couple hours here. I'm in the 3 hole. Went Justin Jefferson, which I love, Kyle Pitts, and then ETN. So similar start. I absolutely, Gretch, would have gone T. Higgins had he fallen there, but he went at 302. I love the start. I don't want to go too far here, Theo, because I'll take it off the board and we can talk about yours. But yeah, I really did the same. That I guess a relatively similar thing.
We took Brown and Bateman in the 4th and 5th as well, so we have a very similar. Yeah. I mean, Jefferson Pitts, we had Chase Pitts, we had Brown, Bateman.
Yeah, basically we swapped ETN for a wide receiver for you guys, and
ETN for Higgins. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love that start here. I think that there's some wide receivers that I obviously would have preferred over the ones I took, but ultimately love seeing the yellow there, and then the detours, as I don't know if you call it detour, but I'll call it my word or your word. But the Kyle Pitts and the Kyler Murray, just absolutely love having those there in the 2nd, the 7th. So
yeah. So you got Elijah Moore there at 6'10". Elijah Moore and Amon-Ra St. Brown both went earlier in the 6th for us than our pick at 6:08. And we labored at 6:08 for the ship chasing community that's listening to some of our mini-sodes.
Who'd you end up going in the 6th then?
We decided to go Kyler. So we decided we would probably go Hopkins. Our ideal was to kind of come out with Hopkins and then Kyler in the 7th. We thought Kyler would make it back. We already had Marquise, and we were like, well, kind of like this is sort of my thought was if we take Hopkins first, it's kind of a worst case scenario because we already had Chase Higgins too. We didn't want to be left in a situation where we had these two like wide receiver pairs and didn't double stack either with their quarterbacks, right?
Yeah. And
so we were like, all right, we're going to take Kyler first. If Hopkins goes, then we can pivot off the receiver. That's less of a bad outcome, basically.
Yeah.
So we went Kyler first. We were still targeting Hopkins. He did go. We took Devonta Smith on the way back.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, love that structure, obviously.
Yeah, it's
what
very
about you,
similar to what you had.
Take mine off, and then we can. Because I still want to talk about the nonsense that I did in the later rounds. But
so I wanted to humble brag about getting a 110 Jamar Chase share. So I got Chase at the 110. It was a very interesting run in a main event. It was a very interesting run where we had a Justin Jefferson goes off at the 104 to Bip Lap Mandel, who's been on the GOAT District, just a great player. And then it goes Eckler, Kelsey, King Henry, Najee Harris, Dalvin Cook, and I'm sitting there and I get a little Jamar Chase at the 110, and I loved it.
The room was tilting.
I would pay for that.
Bip was a little upset.
Continue to brag, man. The room was going ballistic.
There's definitely some anger in that, but hey, 6, 7, 8, 9. I can understand the Eckler argument, but the other guys, I think there's no way, especially after we see the all white jersey with the white helmet today. Jamar Chase is wide receiver.
Well, and I understand if a couple people like structurally really want to start with a running back or whatever, but it's wild that many people are sitting at 7, 8, 9 and going, I can get a share of Jamar Chase at 7, 8, 9. I'm not going to get another. This is a unique build already. That's awesome. You're going to have a very unique build with Chase.
And then I got Swift in the second round, so I was happy with that. Then I went.
Yeah, there's not going to be a lot of Chase Swift teams this year, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. But then I went Waller, which in retrospect, I don't hate at the end of the third. But I'm knowing what I know with this the way the board is gone, I might have pivoted there. Then I went Waddle. I actually took Elijah Moore at the 5-10 because my board went wide receiver crazy. There was a big run. It was Judy went, and then I took Elijah Moore, which I don't really hate. I like Elijah Moore. And then I actually went with a pick neither one of you will like. I went with Antonio Gibson in the 6th round, which I've kind of come around on slightly.
I like it.
I don't mind Gibson in the 6th. I know that there's some people completely off of Gibson, but I feel like we might have seen like an overcorrection for where he's going. I mean, we've seen him average 14 points per game 2 years in a row. I don't love the situation, but where I start seeing him going like mid-6th, I've drafted a couple football guys, teams like that, and I don't mind the structure of where it goes. But again, it's kind of like a retrospect thing because there was another huge wide receiver run, so I actually pushed Chris Olave in the late 7th. There's a lot of quarterbacks still on the board, a lot of running backs still on the board. But wide receiver was completely drying up, and I wanted a high upside guy. I'm betting on him having a better year than some again in New Orleans. So it's interesting to talk about these structural builds and talking about these slow main events, and I think it's great to do some of these ones early. But I wanted to pivot back over to.
Did you take Olave over Garrett Wilson? Or
I
had
did.
Wilson not gone? You did.
I took him over Wilson because I have Elijah Moore, and I didn't want to double down on the Jets wide receivers. Not to table talk if anybody's listening in currently in my main, but I do, Andrew and I do like Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
But I haven't liked doubling down on like questionable offenses.
Sure.
Like we've done this a couple times. Like Andrew and I took Darnell Mooney and we considered Cole Kmet. We're not doing any kind of a double tap with any offense we're not sure about, especially in some of these early drafts. So yeah, I like Wilson. But I don't see him going in the next few picks. I think he'll be there if I want him, coming up. I think more likely than not, you're going to see somebody take, one of the elite quarterbacks and maybe it starts a different run. So I know it's hard to say with these early mains. You could throw ADP out the window.
Yeah, Theo, before you pivot away, throw my board back up on there. I want to ask Gretch a question. And honestly, I think you and Sean articulated my thoughts. I like when you guys articulate my thoughts that I have, but you say it in such a better way. The draftable wide receivers through 11, I ended up taking Rondale Moore, but I don't know how deep dive you looked at some of these running backs. Aside from ETN, Gretch, I only have rookie running backs. Kenneth Walker, Spiller, Robinson, Jameer White, Snoop Connor, Tyler Beatty. There was just a situation.
I mean, it's better than the teams that are just loaded up with 28-year-old backs, in my opinion, personally.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where, like, if you look at, we ended up having a few runs on these even rounds for the running backs where they just kept flying off the board, but it just kept coming up a situation where I wanted to still have the last, call it, draftable wide receivers here, especially with this Rondale Moore of the double stack of Kyler.
Yes.
What's your, and maybe you already just said it there. What's your position there? Is it just you absolutely still have to be smashing these Michael, I guess I never had a chance for Michael Carter, maybe the Darrell Henderson, Kenneth Gainwell instead of Rondale Moore. Maybe we just I asked that specific question there in round 11. Given this build, let me.
No, I'm definitely taking Rondale Moore in round 11.
Okay,
I mean,
all right.
You're completing that double stack. You've already taken 3 running back. I mean, I'm going to be less running back heavy than most. So when you're asking me, you got to take that.
Okay, good. I'm asking you.
But when you take Ken Walker in 8 and when you take Isaiah Spiller in 10, I'm with you. We're there's not going to be a lot more at receiver later. You had 5 good receivers to that point, or Tony's an upside receiver that I like in the 9th round. Wide range of outcomes there, right? But 4 really good ones in the early rounds. I mean, obviously in FFPC, we're talking 2 running backs, 2 receivers, 2 flex. You can do whatever you want in those flexes. I'm typically thinking of those as, wide receiver positions because there are a lot more wide receivers that can fill them. If you can fill them with elite running backs, I know there's a lot of people who are trying to hammer running backs and try to get to 4 good running backs. But if you can get depth at receiver and fill out those flexes at receiver, that can be really helpful. So you had basically 4, Tony as a pretty good 5th. I mean, I'm definitely going to want to get a 6th there. If there's anything that I would say about that draft, I feel like it's a receiver light still, right?
Yeah.
That, because that's just where I come from. It's
yeah.
And there's not a lot more you could have done from there though. So I do actually like that you didn't try to fix that. You were hitting the running backs that you like and make, trying to be deep there. You can obviously still flex if you get breakout running backs, but maybe if it was me, I might not have taken Ken Walker. Maybe I would have went receiver.
Still another receiver there. Yeah. In retrospect, I'm in on Ayuk, and I know we're gonna hit a bunch of receivers, so I don't skip ahead. But I wanted to ask that question because I know I was texting Theo as we kept going. I was like, hey Theo, I gotta tell you, man, it's another rookie running back for me. Make an absolute shit show of this team with all rookies.
And I think in the early drafting, if it's training camp and you start getting really positive reports on Isaiah Spiller, he moves up. There's a chance Zamir White moves up. Snoop Connor, I know you've been hammering all dynasty season, and he could be interesting. So I think you got values on those guys. But just leaving the board up, this particular board is not as wide receiver crazy as mine. Kadarius Toney in mine goes in the mid 7th. Here you're getting him in the 9th. When you start getting into these main events where wide receiver just keeps getting pushed up and pushed up and pushed up, do you guys think there's some value to kind of zigging while others zag and diving into maybe go with elite one-off positions or pivoting to a running back? I mean, is there a point where the value is going to present itself differently, or do you think you potentially push up wide receiver a little bit more to make sure that you get those guys that you think should be going in the 5th, or should be going in the 6th, but they happen to go in the 5th? I mean, how do you guys handle those boards where people are drafting like you? Maybe start with Ben on this.
Well, I think Shelly hit my answer really well by saying there's this point where receiver to me loses the upside. It's not as deep of a position as you want. So if people are hammering it and you start taking a different line towards running back or something, you're going to basically get boxed out at wide receiver, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I think wide receiver points, all positions are going to, all the points count the same. But I want to make sure that I have strong receivers. That is a key to a lot of my drafts. They're, I think, more stable, more projectable. Targets are more projectable. Skill is more projectable at the receiver position. We don't see players from the late rounds at receiver suddenly gain 12 rounds of value like Darrell Henderson did last year when Cam Akers, got injured. Because running back's such an opportunity-driven position, you can hit ceiling outcomes later in a way that you just really can't at other positions. And so receiver for me, it's really important to get in that group. So if people are hammering it, I want to hammer it even more. And basically I'm just thinking, all right, I'm more likely to go like full zero RB. I'll get better running back starting like the 8th round, but I want to already have like 6 receivers by that point. And then I can switch over to running back a little earlier. And if people are pushing down these running back values, like I wouldn't mind taking a Ken Walker in round 8 in a draft like that. Or in this draft, frankly, actually, I was kind of going back to that point because as I looked at this more, I think maybe Spiller is the one. I actually kind of like the Walker pick because that was a tough receiver spot. But I probably would have went Garrett Wilson instead of Spiller. Might have been the one that
Can I tell you though? It's so funny because like I'm gonna make the same point Theo just made. I had the same mindset where it was only between Spiller and Garrett Wilson there. I didn't want to go double jets.
Yeah, you had Elijah Moore too.
I really didn't.
Makes sense.
It got in my head, and maybe the point Theo is I gotta.
No, I think that's fair. I wasn't realizing you had Elijah Moore. So
no, I mean, but that it was the same mindset that Theo you just said that you had with the Olave pick that you had.
But
no,
go ahead.
I
was just gonna wrap up and say to summarize that, like if I start seeing a receiver heavy draft, like I'm not. That's the position I don't want to pivot away from in that scenario. Almost any other run, I don't join in the run on, right? Like I think there's other pockets and other ways to do it, but receiver, I want a lot of depth at, and it's gonna make me want to draft receivers more, frankly.
Yeah. And pushing guys up, like will you start reaching down for your guys? Where kind of again, we can throw ADP out the window a little bit. These drafts are early, but like for example, like if you want a Kadarius Toney, you see the way the room's gonna respond. Do you kind of take him a little bit ahead of ADP?
Yeah.
Devonta Smith, anybody who, a younger wide receiver that you're targeting. And how early would you go in these sort of, big money drafts?
To me, it's sort of it becomes like a 2v2 thing where it's like, in those types of drafts, and I've been in them, we get a lot of them in ship chasing when we're doing the best ball drafts, and everybody they get crazy wide receiver heavy, some of those drafts over there. You'll get running backs 2 rounds after ADP, right? So it's like if I take an 8th round receiver in the 6th round and a 6th round running back in the 8th round, it really kind of doesn't matter. Like I'm okay to reach in that scenario. I don't even really necessarily think of it as a reach. I guess I would think about it in terms of the positional ADP. And if you still think it's the right decision structurally, you're reaching by ADP. But like I said, like obviously, if that many receivers are going, other positions are getting pushed down, or you're going to get a great QB value, you're going to get a great tight end value. Somewhere you're going to get some of that value back. You got to be, flexible still. I'm not saying I'm just like absolutely hammering receiver. If I get into a pocket where I feel like the next group of receivers isn't that interesting, and there's another pocket after that I do like some of the receiver names, then I, still might pivot out of that, right? But I'm going to be more diligent about those detours. If I'm taking a detour, it's intentional.
Yeah. First of all, Theo, agreed. Greg, can you post Alex P. Keaton's chat? I totally agree with this. So great. Great point by Alex. Very, very, very well thought out.
Great point by Alex.
Going to be super serious.
They're going to be like 2 top 15 wide receivers now, and we could have had them both.
That's good
shout out to Alex
analysis. But I think Theo and Gretch, I think that the 6th and 7th round to me right now is like the perfect detour spot. Like, even if receivers are getting pushed up, I'm just going to like name names, right? Like Adam Thielen, Amon-Ra St. Brown, look at the draft board that we have posted here. So go to the YouTube. DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk, Russell Gage. I got to tell you, that's the perfect spot where I'm coming off. And whether it's pulling Joe Burrow up, whether it's Kyler, Lamar, like that to me is the perfect detour. I don't mind smashing wide receivers. But I'd rather either skip that tier of older guys and go down, I guess, to the Treylon Burks again if I'm looking at this board, or a quarterback than smashing like a Thielen, a Gage, and a Kirk. And maybe that's just me, but I'm going to be really ageist about those guys.
That's
and I think
literally the pockets I was thinking about when I said if there's a pocket you don't like and a pocket you do like I like the rookies in the pocket after that. That's when I would detour and I would come back in.
So you'd either detour to quarterback or tight end or pull somebody up like around an
I mean, if it's a really receiver heavy draft and maybe I'm 0 RBing, like I might actually be able to get like a J.K. Dobbins in that wide receiver range. You know, I mean, I've been there and I'll do that. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to take a dead zone back in this draft because it's an incredible value.
Yeah, and like Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray are always sitting there if you want to pivot. I mean, they're just living in that 6th, 7th round right now. So I wanted to get back to stealing signals. You wrote an awesome piece on A.J. Brown. It was called All Roads Lead to A.J. Brown. Maybe you could talk a little bit about tacit knowledge idea and how it applies to A.J. this year. It's really interesting seeing kind of where his ADP is going. We're seeing him regularly going behind or right next to Michael Pittman, the DJ Moores, a couple other receivers that maybe 2.5 months ago we wouldn't have bet would be right next to him in ADP. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the article and your thoughts on A.J. Brown this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty stoked on Brown. Basically, I mean, this guy started his career with 3 straight years of a 2.5 or better yards per out run. And that is like, it's hard to explain how elite that is. Like, if you get better than 2 yards per out run in any season is elite. There's a very, very small percentage of players that have started their careers with multiple 2+ yards per out run seasons in a row. I don't know this for a fact, but he might be one of the very few ever to do 3 in a row at 2.5 or better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, he's just been super elite. I think his career high in routes run is like 406, though, because his team hasn't dropped back to pass a lot, right? He's been banged up at times. They've had some weird games and game scripts where the Titans in particular, where they didn't always run him out in full route shares, maybe because they were trying to keep him a little healthy as he was dinged up and all that. His rookie year obviously took until the end of the year for him to be in a full route share. But for that stretch, he was absolutely elite, right? The next year, a couple injury issues. Last year, dealt with some stuff as well. Part of me, I think a lot of people are just saying, okay, he's going from low volume passing offense to another low volume passing offense. He's got more competition now. We're going to knock him down a little bit. You look at his targets per out run, some of that stuff, it's incredible. You also look at this element where he hasn't ever been a full route share guy, and there's this potential for him to actually add routes, right? You also look at what he did in college alongside DK Metcalf. They played 20 games together. He doubled them up in receptions. Absolutely was the alpha. He was the number 1. Metcalf was the number 2. It wasn't a 1A, 1B thing. He was the elite guy. So you put all those elements together. You talk about him changing teams. I'm a little concerned about a little bit more target competition, but I think there's certainly in his range of outcomes this reality that he's just like a top 3 receiver in the NFL, full stop, right? He's just elite. He's going to be the elite number 1 in this new offense. And then maybe they treat him as a player that actually runs routes 100% of dropbacks all the time. That's something that actually was a low-key part of Cooper Kupp's breakout last year. He started earning targets per route at a much higher rate than he ever had. He was also more efficient. Those were the big drivers. But also Kupp used to be a guy a couple years ago and earlier that would not get to run routes on every dropback. He would come out of the game at weird times. He never ran as many routes as Robert Woods. Last year that flipped. Suddenly Kupp was running routes on every single dropback. He was the number 1. He was viewed that way in the system. If Brown gets that, that alone should be beneficial to him. There's other, concerns with him. Obviously, there's the long-term trend of wide receivers changing teams. There is the fact that the Eagles might still be sort of run heavy. I think they're a low-key bet to throw quite a bit more this year after drafting Devonta Smith in the first round last year and then trading for A.J. Brown this year. I mean, I think they're trying to add weapons. They do have a mobile quarterback. They were run heavy last year, but if that shifts a little bit, if it shifts a lot, if they're the year the Bills went full pass on early downs, pass with intent with Josh Allen, if they do something like that with Jalen Hurts, now that they have the wide receivers as the strength of their offense right now, pretty clearly, I mean, I think there's plenty of upside for A.J. Brown. So, I mean, he's a guy I do definitely really like in the 3rd round.
And you think he is potential to, be the league winner from the range people are starting to get him in?
Yeah. So when we're talking about I'm not talking about the 2.5 yards per out run stuff. I mean, the way I look at yards per out run, I break it up into the two elements. In fantasy, when I was talking about opportunity and efficiency, I think of receiving as having three elements. Routes run is the opportunity. We used to always talk about targets as the opportunity, but targets, like target earning, is a skill that's become very well known, I think, now in fantasy. So when I talk about targets per route run, that's sort of the first efficiency metric. How good are you at that? How good are you at earning what we think of as volume or opportunity? But really, you got to be good at running routes and getting open. He showed an elite ability to do that last year. I think he's elite at that element. Then there's the third element, which is the after the target efficiency: yards per target, touchdown rate, catch rate, whatever. Yards after the catch. What do you do when the ball's in your hand? AJ Brown's elite at all that stuff. Like, he's one of the very rare guys that is a downfield ADOT guy that also adds yak, because yak and ADOT are inversely correlated. It's, a lot of the guys that are getting targets on the line of scrimmage are doing a lot with the ball in their hands. Brown has some really impressive metrics so far in his career in terms of that combination. And so you have this guy who's going to be pretty elite after the target already, showed really elite target earning skills last year. And this is why over his 3 years, he's been a 2.5 yards per out run guy each year. He can do both elements of it. He's like, in my mind, he's like a prime Theo or a prime Julio or a prime Calvin Johnson. Downfield, big receiver, adds yak, elite target earner. So yeah, I mean, in terms of can that guy be a league winner? And he's going in the third round. I love that.
Yeah, it's Andrew. We took AJ Brown at the 302 in the FFWC video showdown draft that we were sharing. What's your thought on him, Andrew? Is he somebody that we should be kind of pushing up, especially for teams? We see kind of very common builds. The 101, for instance, we're seeing it's either McCaffrey or Taylor every draft, and then we're seeing T. Higgins and usually another wide receiver. Should AJ Brown be the person we're pairing up with that elite running back?
Yeah, this is why I'm not going to come on anymore. This is just listening to guests gives me a pit in my stomach about decisions that I made weeks ago. I really should have done the AJ Brown over ETN in that third round of that main. I also checked. I'm really glad.
I love ETN too. I don't think that was a bad thing.
I'm glad, Theo, you mentioned that we had him in a tournament setting or a best ball setting, because I just checked my ownership percentages and I realized that I've got a ton of exposure in Dynasty, but absolutely none in the football guys or the main events yet. So I gotta go figure out how I sort that out. But I agree, and if he kind of feels like now, obviously solidifying, listening to obviously Gretch and others, he feels like a great, in my opinion, I'll call him a consolation prize to Higgins there. If you're looking late second, early third.
Yeah, I think he's right there with Higgins personally, but to me, those guys probably aren't as different from CeeDee Lamb as it seems. Yeah. Even though I do like CeeDee Lamb, but I think we don't have a clear wide receiver 6 this year, wide receiver 7, and that tier is sort of flat. They all are really good into the third round. I'm still comfortable taking CeeDee Lamb in the early second, but in drafts, I think the gap between them feels bigger than probably their profiles actually are. And Lamb's kind of pushed up to wide receiver 6 because there's no one really challenging that. There's no other receiver that is right behind these, the top 5, Devonta Adams and Diggs, and then obviously the big 3. And Brown and Higgins is where that group sort of ends on the back end to me. And you start to get into okay, now you're in the middle round receivers,
Quick OTC for you both. I think I know which way you're each going to go. Deebo Samuel or AJ Brown? Start with Andrew.
I'd go AJ Brown.
It kind of depends. Is that fair?
If you're drafting tomorrow.
If their ADPs come together too, then I'm taking AJ Brown. And if I have one draft and it's for a bunch of money, I'm taking AJ Brown. If I'm doing all my drafts, I want some exposure to Deebo too. I'm not going to start drafting AJ Brown a half round ahead of ADP to get Deebo, right?
Yeah, I think I'll say the same thing. It's for me, they're very close. I haven't taken a lot of Deebo because I think he's getting pushed up right now. And then I'll throw out Tyreek Hill, who's going slightly ahead of AJ Brown, and a guy we'll talk about in a little bit.
I like Tyreek more than AJ Brown. My opinion.
I think peer rankings. I think I'm still taking AJ Brown. I that's a tougher one for sure.
Yeah.
Tyreek can. can make me look really bad on that for sure.
I might be leading Tyreek Hill at this point, but again, it's a very tough one. Pivoting over to running backs,
it feels like. Sorry, before we switch it, it feels like on all those questions, Debo, Tyreek, AJ Brown, it's more a question of how much you buy into the pass offense, right? Like, how much are you buying into Miami's passing situation? How much are you buying into Trey Lance and what could happen in San Francisco? How much are you buying into Philly and their pass upside? Because like all three of those guys are incredible receivers, right?
Yeah, they're all very tilting at ADP because you can tell yourself a story that they're going to smash, and then you've offense question marks. It's very tilting.
Cross sport analogy. It's almost like being what the Houston Rockets this year. You get the Chet Bancaro or the Jabari Smith, and the Rockets are in a pretty good position because they're going to take the third one. They don't have to. The decision's made for them, right? So if you're picking at the 103, okay, fine. Debo and AJ Brown go ahead of you. Okay, great. I'll take Tyreek, or you'll take whatever falls to you, and you'll be happy about it at the end of that second round.
I love the NBA rookie analogy you bring in there, Andrew.
You got to go cross sport, cross cultural whenever you can. It's very important.
Quick question in the chat from Johannes Sanchez, who's an FFPC player and a loyal listener. Is wide receiver point per game scored relatively flat after wide receiver 8? Richard Rebar talks about it.
I don't know the specific Rebar research she's referencing. My immediate thought is that he's talking about like in past years, we often see like a top tier that's like the top 8, and then it's relatively flat. Is that accurate? As opposed to like
that's how I'm reading it. That's how I'm reading it.
And I think that's pretty true. I think there's usually a pretty big block of points per game. There's some differentiators each year, and then a pretty big block that are close. One of the things about and people often talk about that, like the full season numbers, full season points per game in terms of why wide receivers deep and you can find guys later and those types of things. I mean, first of all, the differentiators typically come from the early parts of draft. We know who the good wide receivers are because like target earning ability is actually really stable. It's not as dependent on situation in terms of, like a running back, his workload is going to be very situation dependent. And so typically the differentiators do come, if not from the first couple of rounds, then the next couple of rounds. I mean, it's usually almost always the top 10, right? But you look at even just like Kupp last year, wasn't an elite pick or a top 3 round pick, but he was a 4th round pick. He wasn't, you're not getting that guy in the 10th. So if you want to find those differentiators, that's part of why I like to go wide receiver heavy. But the second element is the consistency with the targets. Like some of the guys that wind up, because wide receivers are way more volatile week to week scoring position. Some of the wide receivers that wind up in those ranges because they have sort of some hot stretches or they have some big breakouts that lead to them getting added off waiver wires. And then you play them and then maybe they're not actually that great. And so they wind up with like a pretty decent points per game range, but weren't ever like consistently startable. I mean, is that making sense?
Yeah.
That's the way I try to think through it.
Yeah.
No, I think that makes some sense. You mean basically the way your draft structure is, you give yourself more exposure to the types of wide receivers that could finish in that,
and to the elite range, or they're going to be like consistently startable throughout. There's some guys that, I guess I'm sort of reading into her question a little bit because she's saying, is it relatively flat? Typically when we say relatively flat, it's like, then it's maybe not worth drafting super high. So the reason I think it's worth drafting is the consistency, the target earning ability, the consistency of points. Whereas, you will have some other receivers
still have a high floor. Like a really high, you could be flat and all have like similar opportunities to jump into that elite range. I mean, I agree. I think that's sort of like a rationale to in the people in that tier to be drafting them.
And I'll also add that I think that the way that Ben drafts, and I think that the way that Andrew drafts as well, you think about top 8 wide receiver, but when we're playing in these FFWC, NFFC, FFPC type formats, and we're thinking about the big picture and overall standings, splits do come into play. Finishing as wide receiver 8 but not being strong down the stretch is not really as beneficial. when you keep drafting wide receiver for depth and you add multiple wide receivers and you get those high upside guys, you end up exposing yourself to an Elijah Moore where he had all those weeks. You get the AJ Brown from his rookie year where he closed out extremely strong.
I was just going to bring up Amon-Ra St. Brown to try to make my point, because he averaged 14 points per game. If you're looking at full season points per game, the point I was trying to make is like the full season points per game and how it looks flat can sometimes lie. But I don't know if this is necessarily the point Rich is making. But Amon-Ra averaged 14 points per game. He's wide receiver 29 in points per game in the list I'm looking at right here. Like, Amon-Ra wasn't a 14 points per game player at any point. He was either worse than that for most of the first half of the year, or he was significantly better than that. And that was awesome, right? That was a stretch when then you were getting him in your lineup and playing him. That's what we're trying to find, is guys that can be consistently 20 plus over a stretch, right? And then have that type of ability. For Amon-Ra, for a lot of rookies, these types of breakouts come late in the year. And so we're trying to hit that archetype of player so that we can get some of that late season upside sometimes. But like, he's an example of a guy who scoring was way different early and late, but then comes in at like on a full season scale at 14 points per game. I don't know. I almost like sort of throw out the flatness of overall season long scoring at wide receiver. I just don't think it really fits to the way that we play it on a weekly level.
Yeah. Yonis gave you credit for the answer. So I feel flash on the board, but Yonis, you guys send us the article. We'll click it. We'll read it, and we'll do some homework, and we'll give you a full dissertation. In a couple days.
A solo pod from Andrew. We'll call it reacting to Rich.
I'll put on a tweed jacket.
Yeah. There you go. The Konami code with Andrew Schellenberg.
That's it.
We might as well stick with wide receiver here. I had a running back question. We can come back to it. We talked a little bit about Debo, Tyreek. Let's talk about two other wide receivers that kind of go right after Michael Pittman and DJ Moore. Just kind of your quick reactions to how they're being valued in ADP and your thoughts of them as mid-third round picks.
I think Pittman's going a little rich. He was a good, not great prospect by my estimation. He was pretty good last year, but at the same time, like, didn't have a lot of target competition, still doesn't. The main issue for me with him is like, when I'm looking at receivers, I still pay a lot of attention to the prospect profile stuff, how productive they were in college. And so like, that's why I brought up even for AJ Brown. I'm not doing this all the way through their whole career, but especially when they're young and we still have some question marks, I'm still paying attention to, like, AJ Brown was that much better, went on the field with DK Metcalf, who we now know is a good receiver. That kind of a thing still is relevant to me. Pittman was good in college. He wasn't amazing. And essentially I had a prior, I would say, coming in that he wasn't necessarily an elite high upside player. He was very good last year. Taking a guy in the mid-third round that I don't think can probably get up to like elite wide receiver seasons levels, and especially also because he's in an offense that we do think almost certainly will be run heavy, right? They brought in a very old quarterback. I mean, I think Matt Ryan still probably has good football left in him, but they have Jonathan Taylor, right? This is not the Eagles situation where I think there's some uncertainty. They could go pass heavy. They got a young quarterback. Maybe they've invested in a receiver. This is a team that is investing in their offensive line, their running back, and they brought in Matt Ryan, and they're going to try to win through running the ball, protecting the football. And Pittman's going to be the number one. He's going to be the clear number one. But I'm looking for the types of picks that I always describe as small miss, big win type picks. Pittman, to me, is not a big win from this price tag, right? Like, he can be a second round wide receiver return. I don't think he can be a first round return. I don't want to take him in the early third, or the mid third. I see him go in the early third now sometimes. DJ Moore on the flip side is a guy I've always loved. When I talk about the targets per out run stuff, he has done very well there in multiple different roles. They use him in a deep threat role. They use him underneath. He adds the yak ability. I think he can win at all depths, which is a key, I think, to being able to put together like a true number one season. I don't think Baker probably means as much to him as the market reacted to, honestly, but still pretty confident in what he can do, and have kind of always been in on that we're going to see an elite DJ Moore season at some point. So,
do you think the Baker news put him to where he should have always been?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought he was a good value already.
Yeah.
And now it's like a little bit trickier to take him, but I'm still gonna. I mean, I'm just sort of like I'm gonna get my exposure to DJ Moore. I'm not gonna have DJ Moore's breakout season be in a year where I don't have some. We all got our guys.
Yeah, Andrew and I took DJ Moore last night in the third round, and I do think that it doesn't take a whole lot for him to take a big step forward. I mean, if he just catches 4 more touchdowns, he's already 28% target share last year. So it'll be just interesting to see if that keeps up as well. Your thoughts on the Chargers duo, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen? Andrew and I took Mike Williams in the 4th round last night. I think that you're seeing a lot of people starting to be very bullish on Mike Williams, putting him ahead of Keenan Allen. Is this a wide receiver situation you want pieces of, or are you specifically focusing on one of the two, or none of them?
Well, we were talking earlier about sort of some of these older receivers. I'm typically looking, I mean, just from a philosophical standpoint, typically looking to find players that, like I'm not trying to pay for past production ever in fantasy. Like so much changes year over year. So with like these aging players, like Shelly was talking about Thielen earlier, I have not drafted Thielen for like a couple of years now because we've started to see some slow decline. He's continued to put up the TDs, which has been nice, but a lot of times then there's an age cliff, right? And the production just completely falls off. Keenan Allen has not hit an age cliff, but he is a guy, when you look at it the way that I do with the targets per route run and then the after the target efficiency, there has been some skills deterioration. In 2020, his yards per target was way down. And then last year we saw the targets per route run follow. And so he's always been a guy that relied on earning targets at a really, really high rate, not necessarily a massively efficient player. He's not this big physical A.J. Brown type, but he lost some of the yards per target from his best season. It was still down last year, and the targets per route run, the target earning fell. And so people will talk about how his yards per route run have fallen basically every season since his peak. Go back to like 2017. I think it's gone down every season. He had a couple really elite years in 2017, 2018. It drops pretty much every year since then. The last 2 years are the ones that are most concerning to me, where we've seen a little bit less efficiency after earning the target. And then this last year, we see him earning volume at a lower rate. Having said that, I can still totally understand being in on him because I certainly don't buy Jalen Guyton, who's basically just one of the wind sprinters. He's like the poster boy for that idea of guy who runs a lot of routes downfield and earns very, very few targets. I'm not that in on Joshua Palmer. I know there's some smarter people than me that are, so maybe I'm going to miss on that, but didn't have a great prospect profile and didn't do enough last year to really change my mind. So it kind of is Keenan and Gerald Everett. And Mike Williams is like that. That's it. Like, so Gerald Everett's a guy that I'm kind of liking as their third option, but Keenan and Mike Williams. And I am in on Justin Herbert's development. I think we all should be. The last time we saw him in week 17, that almost tie game, everyone was rooting for the tie. He was incredible. That was one of the best second halves and into overtime. I think he converted like 6 or 7 fourth downs. It was so absurd. Fun. It was such a fun game. I want to be in on him so I can get being in on Keenan Allen, basically betting that somebody is going to benefit from Justin Herbert's continued takeover of the NFL, because this guy's going to be a star. But all of that is a lead into Keenan versus Mike Williams. Mike Williams doesn't have a ton in his profile that makes me buy into him either, but because there's a little bit more decline in Keenan's profile, and Williams did have kind of a career best season because he had a great start to the year last year, really faded, but we saw more from him. He's the one that I would prefer because I think it's weird though. Like, you don't see a lot of year 6 breakouts, but like, I think he could be he's not young, right? But there could be more to his profile than we've seen. Right. He's the guy that could bring something that we haven't seen yet.
And like you said, he was dominant to start the year last year. If he just has a little more consistency in terms of the scoring, I think, he could pay off. Andrew, are you on? I know we took Mike Williams last night. Are you on either one of them?
This may come as a shock, but I don't know either of them personally. But I love rooting for Keenan Allen more than I like rooting for Mike Williams. There's just something about the Keenan Allen game. I think I love the hoodie underneath the jersey. There's something sick about that. I love rooting for Keenan Allen. Having said that, like I kind of got to bite that potential age cliff bullet, Gretch, that you're mentioning. I know we had Adam Harstad on who discussed that on the Goat District, a couple months ago too, Theo.
Yeah.
And I just think that in terms of bets that you're making there, you easily see a scenario where Keenan Allen hits that age cliff, and you get absolutely zero production there, and you have a huge miss in that third round where maybe that rising tide of Justin Herbert still lifts potentially Mike Williams. And again, that's a little flimsy because it could go either way. But I'm just more worried about the age cliff. So I have been kind of breaking the mold of my own mind of flipping it to Mike Williams here recently.
The two now fourth round draft picks, Jalen Waddle and Deontay Johnson, are both super enticing. I know, Ben, you half jokingly said that Deontay Johnson could be this year's Cooper Kupp just based on his ADP earlier in the spring. I took Waddle in my main. Andrew and I are big Waddle fans. Your thoughts on Waddle and Deontay in this range?
Well, Deontay's not just it's the guy that could rise out of this ADP range, right? But for him, it's again breaking it down in terms of targets per run after the target efficiency. His targets per run have been elite, and they were elite in college. Another one where you can go back, you can look at the college numbers. This dude earned targets per route at an incredible rate all throughout his college career, was very strong as a rookie, and then basically elite year 2, elite year 3 at the NFL level. He's just good at earning volume. He has never really been efficient after earning the volume. His yards per target suck. He's not like he has these big bad drop figures, right? He doesn't do a ton after the catch. So the reason I say he could be Cooper Kupp essentially is if you have a spike efficiency season, efficiency is the hardest part of this equation to predict, right? We don't really know. If he gets good quarterback play, I don't think he's going to get good quarterback play, right? Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett don't really instill a ton of confidence, right? But Roethlisberger was pretty bad last year in his own right. And so there's almost this how much worse could they be element? And if they could actually be competent. Now, I do think there's something to probably Roethlisberger liking Deontay, sort of keying in on him the way that he liked to key in on his number ones throughout his whole career. But if Deontay can maintain this targets per out run that he, like I said, was doing even in college, this seems to be a skill of his, and then have better QB play, better efficiency, and have an efficiency spike type season, he could have that monster type of year just because he can earn so many targets. He can earn so much volume. I mean, that's why I look at targets per run so much. Targets are so huge, right? And he has that displayed ability to earn a ton of volume. It's another reason I like Waddle. Waddle earned a ton of volume as a rookie. Really strong targets per run. We didn't see enough efficiency out of him either. Didn't see him enough explosive plays. He has the profile we would expect them, right? He's an elite athlete. I'm not super in on Tyreek in part because I kind of think Tyreek and Waddle are like a toss-up to be the better receiver this year. I don't think Waddle's maybe that much worse. And so I just like Waddle a lot more at cost. He's the second-year type of receiver we'd want to target. Obviously, adding Tyreek to the offense isn't great for him, but maybe it opens up some things. We don't always know how these things play out. Maybe it opens up more of the explosive plays that he didn't have. Maybe it takes some of his targets per out run because he's now competing with another guy who's really good at earning targets per route. But maybe it adds to the efficiency side of the equation for him. That's basically what I'm projecting for him, that he actually gets into some more big plays as teams have to roll safeties over Tyreek's way. So I definitely like both those guys.
Theo, what about you?
I think Andrew froze up. We'll come back to Andrew's question. We'll just keep going here. Hollywood Brown, in or out? We'll call him the 4-5 turn.
He's a super interesting one because he's been pretty good throughout 3 years. Very low volume offense. Obviously, it spiked a little bit more last year. And now you're going to go into an offense that's like almost certain to run a ton more plays and throw more. Obviously, again, the Ravens did throw a good amount last year, but playing with this college quarterback, there's a lot of reasons to like him. I mean, he's probably going to get off to a fast start with Hopkins suspended. They're going to have to rely on him quite a bit. So, yeah, I mean, I'm in on Brown. I wouldn't say I'm like over the moon on him. His profile hasn't been perfect or anything. And Hopkins comes back, and maybe Hopkins then is still Hopkins. He had a little bit of the skills deterioration last year, but he was hurt quite a bit. But there's some concern about him as well. On the per route run side, you should control for the injury some. He wasn't earning volume well at all. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty there. I think that maybe his injuries were really affecting him more than, I would make an excuse for like a Keenan Allen who, wasn't playing hurt the way that Hopkins was. So when Hopkins comes back, there's some risk that maybe Marquise Brown isn't the same guy down the stretch that you need. But I think he's going to be a good fit in that offense, and it's going to be the biggest like offensive volume boost he's ever had. Again, other than last year, like the Ravens did throw a ton last year.
And you have to like the fact that you're anticipating him getting off to a very fast start. I think that kind of gets underrated. Where we talk about so many things in drafting, but winning games and scoring a lot of points early puts you in a great position in all of these formats. And I think that it gives you an opportunity to take other wide receivers that might develop behind him, and you could potentially build a monster. Andrew, I've seen you take Hollywood. He's one of your targets in that range. Any other thoughts on him?
No, but he's sort of
is he more of a player that you just take.
He's sort of like a last of that tier.
Yeah.
Like I want to get him at the end of that fourth. It's not like I hate it. It's definitely not. I'm throwing up all over myself. I'm happy taking him there. But there's certainly players that I think I'd rather prefer or pull up if he's gone. Pull up somebody from like the 5th or 6th round. Theo, Gretch, some housekeeping notes. Bad internet housekeeping notes. One, DJ Moore, absolutely epic Goat District Pete Pat show last year when you guys were doing those mini-sodes and you guys, the ship chasing guys were talking about whether they should let DJ Moore go past my pick at the 12. And they were, it was great. They were like, oh, there's absolutely no way 12 spot takes him. And of course I took him. So we ended up having a great podcast about that last year. Really fun to listen to. And hint, I'm still in on DJ Moore this year. On the Jalen Waddle, Deontay Johnson, Stats and Information Desk from Fantasy Mojo says that their one lucky one hole has gotten them each at the 412, the max pick so far through 12 slow main events. The good news is none of those are 501, meaning that no lucky one team has gotten both Waddle and Deontay Johnson at that 4-5 turn. So at least there's some level of solace there.
So I actually have our board up because we were talking about my team earlier. Deontay did go 412 in my main. We took Marquise in the 4th, and we're debating purely Marquise or Deontay. I was kind of leaning Deontay. Pat liked Marquise. Arizona has that really filthy playoff schedule as well, which is a really strong point in Marquise's favor for these types of tournaments. We ended up going Marquise. But I thought that was a really nice. That's interesting that you say that because I was like, I thought that was a great value for the one who got Deontay.
I think standalone. Going back to the point about Marquise, I like him a lot. But if it's between Marquise and Deontay, I'm probably going Deontay.
I'm Deontay as well on that one.
One last housekeeping before you move on, Theo. Just a question on Waddle. This is the question I was going to ask before my internet cut out. Pre Tyreek Hill trade, I was taking Waddle in the 2nd round. Maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm not. More likely an idiot. If Hill's not there, is that the right value for Waddle? Like, is that the way to look at it? I know, Theo, we talked about Devonta Smith in those terms. Okay, AJ Brown's not here. Where are we taking Devonta Smith? Yeah. Similarly, where would play the hypothetical game? Where would you all be at on Waddle?
We kind of had that from best ball drafts.
That's what I'm saying. I was taking him the 2nd round.
Pre-trade, he was a late 2nd round pick. And that's a 2nd-year wide receiver who had I just pulled it up, 23.8% targets per out run like he did. I mean, he's a 2nd round pick. I mean, like that's where I would take him. I take him right about where Tyreek's going.
I think that to that point, like if you have the opportunity to get even at to me, the 3-4 turn, so I was talking 4-5 turn, with Deontay and Waddle, I don't even think that that's a bad 3-4 turn if you go Deontay and Waddle, depending on other value that may or may not be there. So I'm really in on Waddle in that early 4th round. If you can get any 4th round Waddle, I would continue to smash it until he moves up.
Early ADP, I was looking at it, Rotoviz the other day, does have Deontay and Waddle kind of around that 3-4 on these slow mains.
Absolutely. Okay, housekeeping over, Theo. You may continue.
Terry McLaurin, are we in or out on him at ADP?
So, I mean, I feel like I've been in on every wide receiver. I do love me wide receivers, and I take a lot of them. But this is a good one where I can say that I'm not particularly high on him. McLaurin's never been really elite at earning targets on the per route run basis that I like to look at. He's always run a ton of routes, which is great. He's that guy that runs 100% of routes on every drop back. I do think they have a little bit more competition there this year. If Curtis Samuel can give him anything, obviously they draft Dotson, they bring in another rookie. De'Ami Brown was, maybe a failed experiment, but we'll see if he can bring anything in year two. Not a guy that I'm targeting by any means, but there's more names there than there has been in the past years. I'm also just not really in on Wentz, generally. I thought he was pretty poor last year. So I don't know that his efficiency can be high enough. And then, like I said, just has always been weirdly just okay at the targets per route run element. He has the high ADOT, which is helpful. Right, the targets he is earning can be big plays, a lot of yardage, but not a guy that I see having first round outcomes in his range, really. So he's not a dude that I tend to take. Largely just it's opportunity cost. There's other guys that I can take that I think do have first round outcomes in their range.
Yeah, I've taken him in the fourth. There's certainly wide receivers I like more. Andrew, do you see yourself having a good amount of F1?
I'm not going to shy away, but he's in that. He's slightly below Hollywood, just above the DK Rashad Bateman. I'm just looking at some of the show notes here. I think that my guess is I'm probably going to be what a third on that McLaurin DK Bateman crew. If I'm picking within that group.
I'll throw out the two guys that we, certainly have question marks about the offense for one of them and the passing volume potentially being a little less predictable. Darnell Mooney, who we took last night in the 5th round, Andrew, and then Brandon Cooks, who's been going ahead of him. Where are you at on those two guys? Are those two guys you want exposure to, or are you pivoting in different directions, Ben?
Cooks is a good example of sort of the older ones that he's been very good basically his whole career. The concussions still worry me. They were a big worry last year. His situation hasn't changed other than he didn't get a concussion last year, but last year it was going later and people were worried about the concussions. He had some concussion issues, I believe, in 2020. Has had a lot of concussions throughout his career. And now he's going higher because we got the full season and he was really good. But I'm still, sort of pretty concerned about his sort of long-term health. I mean, obviously it's a very serious thing. And then also just the team's not great. What's the real upside? I think we saw the upside last year and it wasn't game breaking. It was very, very good. He earned a ton of volume, but he's going to be held back by their team's not going to score a lot of points and those types of elements. How do you get to a high touchdown rate when your team's not scoring a lot? And that's sort of the issue with Mooney for me too. I've always been lately have been a big Justin Fields guy since he came in last year. I do think he's going to develop well, and Mooney's in a good spot. But he was also in a good spot last year because Allen Robinson was just sleepwalking through last season, literally bringing nothing. Had a career worst season across the board, efficiency, targets per out run, everything. Basically, just didn't want to be there on the franchise tag. Is the way that I'm reading into
Put
that.
A stamp on it and just mailed the season in.
Just mailed the whole season in. There's no other way to really describe it. And Mooney was good, not great, right? But didn't have a lot of target competition. He still doesn't, like I said. But both of those are guys that you're betting on target volume because there's not much else in their offense and those types of things. But I don't know that they themselves have, the types of wide receiver profiles. I was talking about how wide receiver is such a talent-driven position. The types of profiles that can return these huge outcomes, the Cooper Kupp outcome, right, out of the 4th, 5th round. There are other guys in that range that I think do have those types of ceiling outcomes. They're going later. Elijah Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown, if he can, do what he did late and continue to do it. So those are the swings I'd rather take.
Andrew, anything to add on Mooney and Cooks? I mean, we took Brandon Cooks last year as an 8th round pick in our main event team. And we loved taking him in the 8th. Now you've got to take him in the 4th. Are you in that?
I was just going to say I love the February, March when I didn't have to take him in the 4th, 5th round. Thinking about the player pool, player, basket, whatever. There's other guys I'm going to be taking other than Brandon Cooks in that end of the fourth, beginning of the fifth round, which is where you have to take him now. And I'm looking at main event ADP there.
And then Mooney we took last night in the fifth. I think it's like Mooney to me, it's like a structural pick because you're going to get a ton of targets. But like Ben said, I don't see him, reaching like top 10 wide receiver level. He had 140 targets last year. I think he'll get that again. He'd have to take a big step forward touchdown wise.
And some of the thing with a player like that, because sorry to cut you off, but like we all agree on that, is going to be philosophical. If you're drafting a lot of running backs early, you might be comfortable with, because that's where you're building the upside into your roster. Your running backs you think are going to drive the scoring on your team. You might be comfortable with that. What we're talking about, sort of a high floor. There's going to be a lot of targets, plenty of volume. The way that I like to build very receiver heavy, I'm stacking as many upside profiles as I can because I'm building in some redundancy as well, right? And then late, I'm stacking in late round running back upside profiles as much as I can. You got to hit on those. And obviously I'll mix in some early running backs too. But on a build where you have a lot of receiver depth, a player like Mooney just doesn't really fit. Like, what is he adding to you? You're swinging bigger with every pick.
Yeah. No, I like that call. I'll give you guys an OTC. You can kind of talk about them because they're going close to one another. Rashad Bateman, who we love the talent. Andrew just perks up when I mention Bateman. And Gabe Davis, the fantasy Twitter poster child right now. They're going kind of close to one another. Where are we at on Bateman and where are we at on Davis? And I'll say that I prefer Bateman. I'll be interested to hear what Ben has to say.
I kind of feel like I would take both at the right prices. I think Bateman's probably going to be really good. Didn't have a great rookie season, was a great prospect, and I still care a lot about that. Didn't play a ton in his rookie year. Still very much willing to buy in for year two. I do think the Ravens offseason moves sort of indicate that they don't want to be quite as pass heavy as last year. They draft two tight ends, even though they have Nick Boyle coming back and Josh Oliver, I think, played sort of all right for them in very limited reps. So they kind of have like 5 tight ends. I can name 5 tight ends. I don't know if I can name 5 receivers on their team right now. I mean, I can, but like it's harder to name their 5th receiver than their 5th tight end. Yeah. Like that's sort of the point. And I think they're going to be back to this 2 tight end offense, this run heavy offense. They got Dobbins coming back, right? They got Gus Edwards coming back. I think if you think about it from their perspective, last year didn't go well for them, right? They closed the season losing every game for, I think, 6 straight. They went very pass heavy out of necessity. I think a lot of people in the fantasy community are like, oh, they figured out analytics and this and that. I mean, if you look at their perspective, like with Lamar Jackson as your quarterback, their analytics mentality might be when we were running or a run-focused offense with Greg Roman developing a pretty strong, run pass, but run-heavy offense around Lamar Jackson, they were a 10-win team multiple years in a row. Then last year they go 8-9. So anyway, I think they're kind of trending towards being more run-heavy again and losing quite a bit of pass volume. And that's the concern for Bateman for me, is purely team level. I really like his talent. Davis is sort of the flip side where, I also really like his talent, but he's in a great spot. And the question is just like, how good is he? But it's how good is he? It's also, is he going to run a full slate of routes? It's sort of the whole question. I want to bet a little bit on that routes uncertainty. I'm trying to get good prices on both and get a little exposure to both. The Bateman stuff, I was saying this to some buddies that I just think he's a little bit too rich based on what their offense actually is, because of just what their offense was in 2021. And so I would like to get a good price on him in that regard. Davis is one, like, I just want to make sure I have some exposure to, because if he does run a full slate of routes in the Bills offense, he's going to be great. And if he doesn't, if he's still part-time, which I don't really buy, like all their moves seem to suggest they're buying into him. So I would say that, like, if I had to take a side on Davis, I'd say I'm in on him.
Yeah. And we'll throw DK Metcalf kind of in that same boat. You touched on him earlier. DK in the 5th round. I mean, you have to want some exposure to that. Yeah. And Andrew, you're on that train as well.
It's like the Jim Cramer, the bye like sound drop. You know what I mean? what I'm talking about?
I know Jim Cramer.
Bye.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah. No, I'm all in. I mean, that's the thing is like if you're going to compare those three, and I like Bateman a lot, Theo, as you alluded to, but like DK Metcalf out of those three and others in that 5th round has a ton more talent. Now I know his situation is absolutely god awful, but my question is like, would it be that shocking for his talent to transcend some of that and get enough volume? Like, I don't think that that's too crazy of a scenario. While I like Bateman, I think that it's getting harder and harder for me OTC to be overexposed to Bateman than DK Metcalf. So I'll be taking more DK Metcalf probably on a go forward basis after.
Yeah, Metcalf has fallen out to a range where he pretty clearly has
room to
more
run.
upside than the guys the receivers he's being drafted around. I mean, in my draft, he went 1 pick after Mooney, 1 pick before Lazard. I mean, we're talking about DK Metcalf. Yeah. And so last year,
your opinion on Lazard, I'm
that's some disrespect on his name
into the chat. But yeah, if you're thinking about taking Lazard and DK Metcalf and your OTC, I think you got to recheck your priorities here.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about the Denver wide receiver situation. Do you have a preferred way to play it, or is that a situation you're going to be avoiding when it comes to Sutton and Judy at ADP?
I'm not avoiding because I do think Denver is a good bet to be one of those offenses that takes a pretty big step forward, right? And you realize you want a piece of that, right? They're an interesting offense. There's a lot of pieces that you could talk about having exposure to. I mean, even at tight end, there's multiple tight ends. I think it's been fun to track the Alberto and Greg Dulcich stuff. Pat over at Ship Chasing is a big Dulcich guy. Our buddy Davis Maddock is a big Alberto guy. They've been going back and forth all year. I think you can get exposure to both those tight ends. I think in the later rounds, I'm more KJ Hamler several rounds later than Tim Patrick, but you can have your options there. And then as far as the early guys, you have, obviously both Judy and Sutton. For me, the preference is Sutton. Like, I think Sutton's a better fit with Wilson. I believe he's a good talent who's been hurt, but every time, like, he's been really pretty good when he's played over the last few years. Judy, I guess a little bit more skeptical of, although he was pretty clearly playing injured after coming back from the high ankle sprain last year. I almost put no stock in the splits where, like, Sutton wasn't getting volume when Judy was around. I mean, I think a lot of that had to do with Teddy Bridgewater and some of the other stuff. But I think I tend to lean Sutton just because I guess I'm more confident that he's the better talent. Absolutely can see a case for taking either. And it's one of those ones where I kind of want to be exposed to either, right? Or both in different ways. Because I do think the overall situation, like, I think Russ is going to have a good year in Denver.
We've quickly turned into a zero RB show. We've gone all wide receiver here, and I think let's keep it going.
That's great.
We're creeping up on an hour and 15, and we value your time. We want to just quickly get your opinion here on. I'll say a couple of upside wide receivers, and you tell me which one you're in on most. Drake London, Kadarius Toney, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks.
I'll take London, then probably Burks, then probably Toney. Olave is the one that I've been a little less convinced on, I guess. He was an older prospect. Over the last couple of years, his college targets per route run actually dropped off a little bit as the competition got stronger, where Garrett Wilson's continued to rise. Jackson Smith and Jigba's the last 2 years were good in his freshman year, Rose's sophomore year. So Olave, to me, that trend a little bit speaks to maybe he's more of an ancillary piece at the NFL level than this potential breakout elite number one. And then you talk about if Michael Thomas is healthy, both Jarvis Landry's still earning volume at a really high clip per route. So both Thomas and Jarvis are guys that are going to soak up plenty of volume. Olave feels like sort of an ancillary piece. Definitely could be explosive in the big play, downfield roll, do some things. But the true like breakout scenarios I think are greater for London and Treylon and even for Kadarius Toney, who had a really good target spread run, small sample, could be somebody who's just really good at earning volume. He's just a wide error bar kind of guy, low floor, high ceiling. You said quick. That was the quickest I could possibly be.
That was great.
Theo, I think I want to make sure you hit on any wide receivers, but I guess, Ben, just to ask like an open-ended one. So if we miss out, we were talking a little bit about like the last draftable wide receivers. I absolutely love that concept. As I said earlier, you guys just put it in terms that I wish I was smart enough to distill it down to something that simple. Are there any good values that stand out towards the end of the draftable wide receiver range, or have you been mixing and matching towards that end? Anything that's more upside that you want to just get out there before we switch to a different position?
Yeah, I mean, KJ Hamler's one that I want some exposure to. Waddle Robinson's a rookie I really like. I'm looking through ADP right now. I think you could take stabs at Will Fuller and Julio Jones at this point and hope, because I do think both of them still have enough talent that they would be draftable on a roster, but they're going so late that you can take some stabs. I just mentioned Jarvis Landry. I mean, it's kind of a bet against Michael Thomas's health, I think, but especially if you have a ton of youth, if you hit a lot of second year and rookie players, which sometimes I'll build a wide receiver core where like my first 6 receivers are all rookies or sophomores. And then getting a guy like a Jarvis Landry, in the 13th round as your wide receiver 7, and you're like, well, at least I got one dude that I think earns volume at a really high clip. And as I wait for some of these guys to break out, the thesis on the young guys a lot of times is they're going to need to break out later in the season. Maybe I'll be starting Landry a little bit in the early part of the year. But yeah, I mean, most of the guys after that sort of that range, or even before that range, I don't really necessarily think have a ton of upside. Kenny Golladay is a guy that, in terms of value, he's sort of fringy in the end of that draftable wide receiver range. I don't think he just like forgot how to play football. I think he had a pretty bad year last year for sure, but he's still like 28. I mean, he's not done. Yeah, so
I like Golladay. It's kind of gross, but I kind of like DJ Chark. I haven't pulled the trigger on him a ton, but I kind of like him if he really slips into that 15th, 16th round.
Yeah, I get that for sure.
Yeah.
He's a guy I would pull the trigger on probably if in a certain build if I needed to. There's a lot of them that I just wouldn't,
Yeah.
Maybe elaborate a little bit on Alec Pierce and your thoughts on him.
I guess I'm not really sold because he wasn't a huge producer in college, but I have heard of some good arguments that maybe that was more about Ritter, and we should be more concerned about Ritter. It's never great when you have your quarterback actually got drafted as well, and you weren't that productive with him in college, right? But he's a good athlete, explosive. I could see him being, a good sort of late round best ball spike week type of player. I don't know that I want him in in a main. The other rookie, I just saw George Pickens' name on my ADP list here. I would take some stabs at Pickens. He was a guy who did have some, before his ACL, some good numbers early in college at a young age, which tends to be pretty, predictive. And I would probably go with a guy like him who's going quite a bit later than Pierce, or Waddle Robinson who's going later. People don't like his size, right? But I tend to not be as concerned about that kind of stuff. Oh, Corey Davis is another name that I think is just weirdly undervalued.
Yeah,
Ben is in on all 3 Jets wide receivers,
which is weird. I'm not in on Zach Wilson independently. Don't take them on the same teams. I'm with you guys.
Yeah.
If they don't target their running backs at all or their tight ends at all, and we get all those guys like 20 plus, that could be interesting. I'll give you one more tier of wide receivers. Pick 1 or 0 between Claypool, Brandon Ayuk, Tyler Lockett, and Tyler Boyd. And I probably shouldn't have put Ayuk in there. I feel like he might be the most appealing of those guys. So we can take it Claypool, Lockett, or Boyd.
Yeah, I would have said Ayuk. Claypool, Lockett, or Boyd. I'm just sort of out on Lockett. I guess I'm just really buying that it's sort of a gut feel thing. He's always been really good, but what everyone else is seeing, what the market is seeing, is that he was always a really good fit with Russ. There were so many of those plays where Russ extended it and Lockett would break free and they'd get a long play. So much of his efficiency was tied to his connection with Russ. And so it's just, and he's not always been the picture of health. He's not a guy I want to take swings on. I guess I would go Claypool, in part because his ADP is sort of higher. You know what? Honestly, I'll just take Boyd because I think it would be Boyd. Boyd is the one that is always too cheap. He has two really good teammates. I think it's easy to forget, like, there's contingent value there. If either Jamar Chase or T. Higgins misses time, like Boyd, I think it probably returns value even if they don't miss time. He's a good player. He's a good number 3 receiver and a good passing offense. But if they did miss time, I think he can be like a 5th round wide receiver type producer. Like, say if Jamar Chase had a serious injury, obviously I'm not hoping for that. I just drafted him in the first round in the first main event. Please freaking don't do that. But if that happened, T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, I think I think Higgins is the star, but I think Tyler Boyd is producing at a pretty high clip. This guy's always been a good football player.
Yeah, no, that's why you're the consummate professional, Gretch. You were put on the clock and you talked yourself all the way around all 3 of the options, and got to a good answer. Love it. What a pro.
So we're at a $120. Ben's been super generous with his time, and we don't want to go too long because we want him to come back to the GOAT District at some point. So Ben, this was awesome. Let everybody know where they can find you.
I mean, first of all, I'm having a great time. I didn't even realize we were at an hour 20, but
we appreciate that.
This was a blast. I want to say to Josh, who asked specifically, I didn't see his question, but specifically because I wasn't really into Pittman. Basically, I just think the Colts are still going to throw the tight ends a decent amount. They're going to throw to Hines and Taylor. They're going to be run heavy. Pierce is going to have some big plays. Pittman's going to be a good, not great number 1. And I just don't really like their passing game at cost, but maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe I'm just wrong to be sort of out on everyone, but that is a good call. Yeah. That if I'm not in on Pittman, maybe I should be taking more stabs on Pierce. You can find me at bengretch.substack.com is my newsletter where I write about a lot of this type of stuff. Stealing Bananas over on the Road of His Radio podcast feed with Sean Siegel twice a week right now. Ship Chasing Wednesday nights with Pat Crane and Pete Overzet. We're just drafting all the time. We're going to be starting up our mains. We're doing slow mains. We're going to be starting up our live mains pretty much as soon as those kick off, pretty much all through August on Wednesday nights, hitting up basically like live stream main events. So, come hang.
Two last questions. First of all, love that. One, if you take Pitts early, which you did, this is what I want to know. This is selfish. Are you going to take another tight end? I'm not taking another tight end. I really
might not.
I'd rather the lotto tickets.
So
I really would.
We typically want in tight end premium. I typically like to build in a little bit of safety at tight end and not be completely done. But essentially, having said that, and this is a 0 RB team, we were talking about just like firing off a ton of running backs and just like we're so early in July. Like exactly what you just said. Like as many lotto tickets as you can. Take 2 guys in the same backfield. We were talking about maybe take Sony Michel and Raheem Mostert, which isn't really our target. That's why I'm using that as an example because I don't want to sit here and tell all the targets that we're thinking about. But take both those guys and be like, we're going to cut one of them in the first waiver run. Yeah, but we're drafting in July and we're going to want to cut people in the first waiver run anyway. Absolutely. So let's just bake this in during the draft. I mean, I'm right there with you. Do stuff like that. Okay,
so then the last question. Then Theo, you might have a last. I don't know, Gretch. We got to do a slow main between the 3 of us, or fast main or something. We got to do something. A stealing the clutch OGs or some kind of main event. Anyway, you don't have to say yes on the spot. I'm putting you on the spot, but we got to do it.
I have a ton of co-managers that I'm like trying to cut down how many different people. Well, I mean, I would love to do it with you guys. I maybe wouldn't be the most help during waivers because I literally have like 10 different co-managers already.
Yeah, we'll do the waivers. We accept your offer.
All right. Usually you start with the football guys request. Andrew.
Just swing for
nobody wants to do the football guys. I mean, sorry, FFPC. They're great partners.
We enjoy the football guys.
We love the football guys. Main events is where it's at.
Main events are where it's at. And this show is where it's at. Thanks for everybody for listening. Thanks to Ben. Thanks to Andrew. We'll be back next week. We have Adam Krautwurst from Draft Sharks coming on. We have Billy Wazowski, the defending NFFC RotoWire Online Championship winner and an NFFC Hall of Famer coming back to the GOAT District. So we're rocking next week. We're going to help you win your leagues. And everybody have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.